Good morning. Yes, Ms Whitelaw.
Morning, sir. Morning, Commander Murphy. As you know, my name is Francesca Whitelaw and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. You were sworn yesterday to give your evidence. Thank you very much for attending again today to give evidence, this time in relation to Operation Reed.
Yes.
In particular, we appreciate that you're attending in place of the Senior Investigating Officer for Operation Reed, Detective Chief Inspector Philip Murphy, who's not able to attend the inquiry to give evidence.
That's correct.
You've already told us in your evidence yesterday that you worked very closely with DCI Murphy, who was the SIO, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Indeed, you have the benefit, as he put it in his witness statement, of being in a more advantageous position in some regards, as you were privy to the sensitive information regarding the suspects, as well, of course, as you liaised with him on a day-to-day basis. So is it on those bases that you're able to give evidence in his place?
Yes, that's correct.
So you're not only familiar, if I've got it right, you're not only familiar with what he said, but you were in charge of him at the time.
I wasn't in direct charge of him at the time, so no, but absolutely.
Critical friend and
yes, I was a little bit of a critical friend to him because I was in possession, as you've heard, of the wider intelligence on the investigation overall.
Quite right, thank you.
Thank you. And firstly, you should have in front of you, I think, a copy of your own witness statement from yesterday that was dated the 2nd of October 2024. For the transcript, the reference is INQ 006056, which you've already confirmed and used for your earlier evidence.
Yes.
Secondly, you should also have in front of you the witness statement prepared by DCI Philip Murphy, which I think is undated and unsigned, but extends to 40 pages, and the inquiry reference for that is INQ 6057.
That's correct.
Have you had an opportunity to review that witness statement?
I have.
And are you able to say that the content, as far as you're concerned, is true to the best of your knowledge and belief, or are there any caveats you need to give to that?
No, there are no caveats, but yes, I agree.
You should also have in front of you a hard copy of the Verbasco report that we mentioned yesterday, I think to your left.
I do.
And the accompanying graphics pack. Sorry, the Verbasco report is INQ 005820. And there's an accompanying graphics pack, in case you need it, which is INQ 005819. But I should say we intend to bring up documents on the screen, so you'll be able to look at the screen in front of you.
Perfect, thank you.
So to begin then, you explained yesterday, but to remind ourselves, that Operation Reed was the reactive counter-terrorism investigation into the poisonings of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley.
Yes, that's correct.
We know that Dawn and Charlie fell ill at 9 Muggleton Road on the 30th of June 2018. When was Operation Reed commenced?
Formally commenced on the 4th of July, but early notification was given overnight on the 3rd of July that there was an incident.
So can I just get the calendar in my head, Mr. Murphy? The 30th of June is a Saturday?
I believe actually, yes, it is, sir.
Right.
The Friday was the 29th when they were in the town
In
centre.
that case, it probably was.
Yes.
Thank you.
By reference to DCI Murphy's statement at paragraph 40, if you need it, could you confirm, firstly, when the poisoning came to the attention of CTP Southwest?
Yes, so on the 1st of July, CTP Southwest were aware that there was an incident. It wasn't until the 3rd of July, when more circumstances became clear, that CT policing in the southeast were first informed of the incident.
And was that the normal process, as far as you understood, that if there was a potential counter-terrorism incident, this case in Wiltshire, at the time was for Wiltshire Police to contact the CT intelligence unit covering that region?
Yes, that would be normal, and then that CT intelligence unit acts as a conduit to the rest of CT policing.
And was the Southwest CT intelligence unit, as explained by DCC Mills in his evidence, the relevant unit in that case?
It was.
Secondly then, and again by reference to paragraph 40 if you need it, could you confirm then, I think what you've said is that CTPSE was informed on the 3rd of July, so the night before the 4th?
Yes, that's correct. So it would have been the duty DI, the detective inspector who was on call that night, was initially informed and made aware, and it wasn't until the following day when DCI Murphy attended, and more circumstances became clear that the investigation was commenced.
I think we heard from DCC Mills yesterday that CTPSE had investigative and as well as intelligence capabilities, whereas the Southwest was intelligence-based.
Yes, although different now. At the time,
Yes.
there were 5 counter-terrorism units in the country, so of which SO15 was one. CT policing in the southeast was one as well. We had full investigative capability. We called them counter-terrorism units. And the southwest at the time was what we called a counter-terrorism intelligence unit. Our network looks very different now. We've all got much more mixed capabilities now.
But at the time then, the larger and the more equipped unit was the southeastern unit, is that right?
Yes, for that region, the southeast, we call them buddy regions, sir. So what that means is that if an investigation is needed in a region that only has an intelligence unit,
Yep.
then they have a buddy counter-terrorism unit. In this case, it was the southeast that was the buddy for the southwest.
Right, got it.
And when the contact was made on the 3rd of July, I think it was DI VN127 who was on call.
Correct.
But there was then a meeting, because I think you referred to the evening of the 3rd of July, and then was there a meeting on the 4th of July between DIVN127, DCS Barnes, who was the head of CTPSE,
Yes.
and DCI Philip Murphy.
There was.
And you gave evidence yesterday about the PIP4, who was the same for the Wadana, Katerna and Reed investigations. Was that DCS Barnes?
It was DCS Barnes, yes.
And at that meeting, was DCI Murphy asked to be the senior investigating officer?
He was, yes.
Because I think that VN012, the SIO for Op Wadana, was on leave at the time.
Yes, that's correct.
So that person, in fact, became the deputy SIO, with DCI Murphy becoming the SIO.
Yes.
If we could go, please, on the screen to INQ 004887, page 2. This document, I think, is entitled Op Reed Mature Assessment at the 7th of July. Does that show the command structure for Operation Reed that we've just discussed?
Yes, it does, yes.
And its number, Miss Whitelaw?
INQ 004887.
It's the last 4 numbers that matter, isn't it? 4887?
Yes.
Thank you.
Page 2 of that.
So where you see on that document in front of you, the head of investigations being Detective Superintendent VN012, that was the Detective Superintendent who was also the Senior Investigating Officer for Wadana. So that superintendent pretty much had oversight of both investigations in the southeast region.
Thank you. And is your understanding, as was DCI Murphy's in his witness statement, that at the time Operation Reed was established, all the officers or staff given designated roles were already or still working on Operation Wadana?
The vast majority certainly would have been, yes.
So giving them the knowledge and experience of the previous investigation?
Correct.
And I'm sorry to labour it, but all these code names and acronyms are completely familiar to you and probably to most people here. But by Wadana, we mean the Scribbles, do we?
Yes, the response to the Salisbury incident, sir. We're drafting a chart, sir, which I hope will help the inquiry with just what those names are and who's in charge of them.
Just remember, Mr. Murphy, that the acronyms may not come immediately to mind for some people here.
Of course, sir. Thank you.
So does that mean that the processes for the investigation were relatively quickly and easily established?
Yes, it does.
In DCI Murphy's witness statement, he refers to a list of investigative objectives which he reviewed and endorsed. If we could go to INQ 005859, page 1, please. Do you recognise this as a counter-terrorism policing police notebook?
I do, yes.
And VN106, we know to be DCI Philip Murphy, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Could we go to page 4 of that document, please? Do the entries under the working strategy accord with what you said yesterday about the investigative priorities encompassing public protection and criminal justice investigation?
Yes, absolutely. This is the first thing an SIO would normally do when they have information. They open an investigation, as DCI Murphy had here, and he creates a number of early working strategy objectives to achieve within the investigation.
Could you just take us through those? Thank you.
Yes, so minimise the risk to public safety, the public, or ensure public safety. That's often our very first priority in terms of preservation of life and the prevention of any harm to members of the public and our staff. Mitigate the risk of state-sponsored acts which interfere with national security. That's taking learning from the earlier incident in Salisbury and applying it because of the similar circumstances, at least in terms of Novichok being involved. Ensure the confidentiality of the police response. This is another area clearly we spoke about yesterday with the need-to-know principles and very sensitive police investigation in this case. Undertake property investigation. I think that's meant to say proper rather than with a T on the end, investigations into the full circumstances surrounding the hospitalising of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley. That's in essence the very basic level of trying to understand all of their movements and understand how they came to be victims of this terrible crime. Protect sensitive sources of intelligence, to secure and preserve evidence linked to a criminal offence and seek criminal justice outcomes where appropriate. Again, that's really about building the strongest possible evidence case through effective scene investigations and witness inquiries to ensure that we're able to understand if there are charges that could be brought later. And then work effectively with partner agencies to maximise the efficiency of the investigation. That includes establishing a fusion and deploying effective investigative response. We spoke about partner agencies yesterday, of course, from the very start of Operation Reed, the same partner agencies were involved.
Under investigative, I assume that's objective.
It is, yes.
Shorthand. Do you understand 0348 to be the time and the date for 7?
I would imagine that is the case, yes.
So we think that would be the 4th of July and the early hours. Does that tie in with the timeline that we've spoken about? Could you take us through the entries there, please, and just explain those?
This is about the SIO setting those very, very early tactical objectives for their investigation team. So to ensure that we secured all available scenes and ensure appropriate safety measures in place. Again, that comes from learning from the Salisbury incident, Operation Wadana. Obtain medical updates and ensure lines of communications are in place to achieve that. So we could keep track of what was happening to the victims. We have very specific victim responsibilities in incidents like this. Research the profile of the victims, really important to understand any victimology in any criminal investigation, but certainly in a case like this. Develop a detailed timeline of movements between 0800 on the 29th, that's the Friday, and 1900 on the 30th.
So Friday and Saturday.
Absolutely, sir. And fast-track submission of forensic samples to identify the poison and the toxin.
Just pausing then, going back to the timeline, can you explain how those parameters were decided?
Excuse me. Well, I imagine it's from the early stages of the Wiltshire Police investigation and trying to piece together what was known about the movements of Dawn and Charlie over those 2 days. DCI Murphy would have set time parameters. Those time parameters can often be very flexible. New information might come in which causes us to adapt and change. But in this case, on the basis of the briefing given to DCI Murphy, he selected 0800 on the Friday to 1900 on the Saturday. And that would clearly encompass the time that Dawn and Charlie were together on the Friday and the incident Saturday and Charlie's subsequent hospitalisation at the end of Saturday.
Thank you. And do continue, you were on the fast-track submission of forensic samples.
So one of the priorities will clearly be to ID the poison and toxin and any other forensic opportunities that might exist. And this is DCI Murphy acknowledging how important it is to prioritise and make sure that those submissions were done in a very timely fashion. Locate offenders. So at this early stage of the investigation, it will be unknown how Dawn and Charlie came to be poisoned. And so if there are offenders, we need to gather all available information to help us identify that, which of course involves working with partners, as I spoke about earlier. And of course, locate any new scenes or sources of contamination, which, if you like, links both to the criminal justice outcome, but also the risk to the public and ensure public safety by identifying any sources of contamination and scenes that might be relevant.
And just a couple of questions on those aspects. When it says obtain medical updates, would that be directly with hospital medical practitioners?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, of course, patient confidentiality is a significant issue here, but that's about trying to work with the hospital to understand what we can find out that helps us to investigate.
And so once CTP took over, would these inquiries be direct rather than through Wiltshire, or would Wiltshire Police be used for those inquiries?
We'd probably have had regular contact with Wiltshire officers who had been doing this work in the meantime, and of course at this time we will appoint family liaison officers as well, which DCI Murphy hasn't expressly referenced, but relating to any victims like this, we would then put specially trained officers into those families so that we can understand from the family any concerns or considerations.
When you mentioned the fast-track submission of forensic samples, do you understand that to mean, is there a general process by which things can be done at speed? Was there a particular fast-track process in this case?
I know it's very general, but of course we'd learnt a lot of lessons from the Salisbury investigation, so Operation Woodana, which meant that we were able to work with our dedicated forensic management team. In counter-terrorism policing, we have a dedicated forensic team, including a forensic manager. We spoke briefly about Mr. Asman yesterday, who would have been an advisor to the senior investigating officer and would have helped to prioritise those samples and ensure that submissions were made to the appropriate laboratory at the right time.
So again, because of Woodana, there would be the contacts already in place and the processes. So do you think that made things more quicker in this case?
So absolutely, yes. We had officers that already had the required levels of training and equipment, but also we had an established relationship, which we'd had for a very long time, but it was clearly very fresh in our minds from Salisbury, with DSTL and other expert scientists who could help advise us.
We're going to move to the section that says hypotheses there, and it does go on the next page, so I'll just read this out. So it says, not from an illicit substance rarely used, but Sturgess not, yet both ill. Then it says, deliberate exposed to a nerve agent which has specifically targeted them. And then if we can go down, and because this is a typed version of an originally handwritten notebook, I think this is the next page. Inadvertent, we assume, exposure to a nerve agent through contact with identified, unidentified location and vessel, linked to a medical episode unconnected to poisoning. Can you just take us through each of those, which I assume are alternative hypotheses?
Yes, so it's quite normal at the very start of an investigation for a senior investigating officer to set a number of hypotheses based upon their briefing and the initial information that's available to them. And that is exactly what DCI Murphy has done here. He's considered the different possibilities for what may have happened to Dawn and Charlie, and is listing them as potential hypotheses. Now, they will act then as the hypothesis from which the investigation will focus its efforts. So when we're conducting outside inquiries, our investigation teams will have in mind that there are a number of hypotheses, and we need to keep an open mind at all times about how, when we're conducting inquiries, it might apply to anything that the SIO has set as one of those.
So keeping an open mind and a fresh investigation,
yes.
But at the same time, ensuring that the links between the investigation, any links are explored, is that right?
Yes, in this case particularly, because of the use of Novichok, it is, or the suspected at that time use of Novichok, I think confirmed on the 4th later in the day on the 4th. Absolutely keeping an open mind because of the similar circumstances between the earlier investigation. What DCI Murphy has done here is demonstrate, I suppose, that he's got an open mind about how this might have happened, but of course is focused on the fact that we've just had Salisbury and this is an extremely rare event.
Can you just go back, Ms. Whittle, so we can see the possible alternatives that were being thought about? This is at 3:45 in the morning, is it?
Yes, this is the very early stages, sir.
Right. Right, thank you.
So again, going back to what I just referenced in terms of your previous evidence about the close contact between you and DCI Murphy and his superiors, so DCS Barnes we've talked about, to ensure that the links between the investigations into the Skripals Wadana and the suspects Katerva were considered. At paragraph 133 of your own witness statement, if you need to refer to it, please do, you refer to your combined attendance at JOT, so that's Joint Operational Team, and ELG Executive Liaison Group meetings. Those are the meetings we talked about yesterday with the security service and the nature of which you explained.
Yes.
Could you just clarify whether you mean that you and DCI Murphy as SIO of Operation Reed both attended?
Yes, frequently what would happen is that the detective superintendent from the South East Counter-Terrorism Unit, who was responsible for investigating the first incidents in Salisbury, DCI Murphy and I would then regularly attend JOTS together, because we had 3 investigations ultimately, and we needed to make sure that we were as cited as we could be on any developments in intelligence. So we would sit in those JOTS and those ELGs. Now, we may not all be present in an ELG, sir. That's the Executive Liaison Group, chaired by the Senior National Coordinator. Frequently, those are quite strategic level meetings, considering all the factors. So we might have 1 or 2 representatives at those meetings, but most of us attended the JOTS.
And the JOTS that employed the strategy that was being set, you'd attend those?
Yes, of course. And that was, of course, the MI5-led meetings where we were sharing all of our information.
And were Operations Reed and Wadana formally linked at, I think, on the 16th of August 2018?
Yes, they were.
And can you just explain the reasons for that?
So once we have confirmed enough information to confirm that this is not a separate incident, so whilst it may seem quite strange that Novichok is such a rare and unusual substance, and that is absolutely true, nonetheless, in order for us investigatively to link these 2 crimes together, it's really important for us to find sufficient to identify that link is proved in evidence for us. So whilst the intelligence and evidence might indicate it is, we need to get to a certain stage of our inquiries to confirm that's the case.
Including presumably through testing results?
Testing, forensics, speaking to witnesses, piecing together the movements of Dawn and Charlie, all of the things that DCI Murphy had in his strategy, plus connected to the intelligence I was in possession of within the manhunt investigation, as we called it, but Operation Katerva, the investigation into the suspects, and the detective superintendent's investigation in the southeast into the events in Salisbury.
So you say that the formal joining of the investigations is the 16th of August, which is some time ahead. Does that actually make any significant difference to what you're doing on the ground?
Not at all, sir. It's really a policy decision. It's something that we regularly do in policing once we've reached the decision that it's time for our policy book to reflect the decision.
Right. Thank you.
But does it also help for the CPS considering charges to have the investigations linked?
Yes, it does. And what it means is that lots of the information held on our computer systems, for example, the Holmes system, which is a major investigation system that indexes all of the information coming into an inquiry, it means that we can link those accounts. So it helps us to read across between information in one investigation to another within both our IT systems as well as in our staff and officers.
But essentially a judgment call, is it, for when the operations are linked? And who makes that decision?
There's a discussion that was discussed at that senior level as well.
And how did the linking affect the roles in the investigation?
So in effect, the detective superintendent from the South East then had oversight of both Operation Reed, the reactive investigation into what happened to Dawn and Charlie, and of course the original incident in Salisbury. DCI Murphy stayed as what we'd call the investigating officer of Operation Reed.
But in fact, once Dawn had died and there became coronial proceedings, is it right that he indicates in his statement that the investigative lines of inquiry transferred to you, whereas he became the point of liaison with the coroner?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So what happens in that scenario, sir, is that because sitting behind the investigation is also our Operation Katerva investigation, which has very sensitive intelligence at the heart of it, plus sensitive police inquiries at the heart of it. I ended up as the responsible officer for all 3 investigations to ensure that when we're pulling together incidents together.
One of the investigative objectives we saw in the SIO's notebook was research profile victims. So I'm going to ask you a few questions now about Dawn Sturgess's background that's addressed in DCI Murphy's witness statement at paragraphs 26 to 29. The inquiry, of course, heard evidence yesterday from Caroline Sturgess about Dawn's background, and I'd just like to look at what the police investigations knew about her. Could we go to the police report, the Vabasco report, which is INQ 005820, please, and paragraphs 124 to 127. I'll read this out. Dawn Marie Sturgess was born in Salisbury on the 18th of June 1974 to Stan and Caroline Sturgess. She had 3 younger sisters. She lived in Salisbury throughout her life. From 2016, she was a resident of John Baker House, a supported housing project, where she was allocated the Cedar Room. By all accounts, she was a loving and much-loved daughter, mother, family member and friend. Dawn Sturgess suffered from a long-term dependence on alcohol, which limited her ability to work and affected her personal life. Her family recall that in the months and weeks before her death, Dawn Sturgess was showing signs of huge improvement in her health and well-being. She was in a romantic relationship and was looking forward to moving into her own flat. Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley were in a happy and committed relationship for approximately 16 months prior to her death. They lived separately but often stayed at each other's addresses. So the footnotes to the Vabasco report, which are contained there, reference some underlying documents in support of this background, which I would ask you to admit as evidence, and I'll just summarise them briefly. So you heard from Caroline Sturgess yesterday, who read the pen portrait for the inquiry, but Caroline Sturgess has in fact made 3 witness statements, which I'd ask you to adduce into evidence. One of those is referenced in the footnotes, and there are 2 others.
So you want all 3 treated as evidence in the inquiry, do you?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I'll give the reference numbers. INQ 004389 is the first. That's the witness statement of Caroline Sturgess dated the 22nd of August 2019. It was prepared for the senior coroner to address the makeup of Dawn's family, the history of her life, her relationship with Charlie, and the account of the events leading up to her death. And we may come back to that statement when looking at the events of Friday the 29th of June later today. It also deals with Dawn Sturgess's alcohol dependency and her belief that Dawn Sturgess was bipolar. Second, Caroline Sturgess's witness statement of the 2nd of August 2019 is INQ 004388, which again was provided for the senior coroner. And this again addresses Dawn's challenges, but also her relationships with others, including Charlie Rowley and her daughter. Thirdly, Caroline Sturgess's witness statement of the 28th of June 2024, INQ 005706. This was a statement made for the inquiry describing the events of the 23rd of June to the 8th of July 2018, and some more background to Dawn's health.
23rd of June to?
The 8th of July, the date of her
Right,
death.
so that's a fairly recent statement. The other 2 are both from August
Some time ago.
2019,
Yes.
about a year after the events.
Yes.
Got it.
So the next statement I'd ask you to adduce into evidence is also footnoted to the Vabasco report in the section dealing with Dawn Sturgess's background, and that is INQ 000827, which is a witness statement of Matthew Lacey, dated the 6th of July 2018. Matthew Lacey was a local services manager who oversaw the tenants of John Baker House, where Dawn was living, and who gives evidence about Dawn and her residence there.
Right.
Thank you. Commander Murphy, could you confirm that the section of the Vabasco report that I read out together with the underlying documents that I've asked to be adduced summarises what Operation Reed found in relation to Dawn Sturgess's background?
Yes, that's correct.
Subject to one further matter. which I'll go to, and that's paragraph 130 of the Verbasco report, INQ 005820. Again, I'll read this out. There's no evidence to suggest that Dawn Sturgess was ever a user of heroin, contrary to press reporting in 2018. There is very limited evidence of Dawn Sturgess being involved with other drugs. Blood tests conducted while Dawn Sturgess was in hospital indicated the presence of trace amounts of cocaine. This is not listed as a cause of her death. Wiltshire police records suggest that Dawn Sturgess was known to them as someone associated with drugs in the local area. Dawn Sturgess had no previous convictions, cautions, or reprimands. Commander Murphy, does that summarise what Operation Reed found in relation to Dawn Sturgess's background as regards drug involvement?
Yes, it does.
DCI Murphy says at paragraph 27 of his witness statement, having reviewed a summary of the underlying records, there's very little to link her personal use of unlawful drugs, though it's clear that people around her were using them. Was that also your understanding of the position?
Yes, it was.
And is it right, as indicated in the Verbasco report, that Dawn had no previous convictions, cautions, or police reprimands, whether for drugs or any other offences?
Yes, correct.
And there was nothing found in the room where she lived, the Cedar Room at John Baker House, to suggest the use of drugs by Dawn Sturgess, is that right?
That's correct.
For the sake of completeness, was there anything brought to your attention or to Operation Reed's attention regarding Dawn Sturgess's background, lifestyle, or finances, which was of any relevance to how she came to be harmed?
Nothing whatsoever.
I'm going to deal briefly as well with Charlie Rowley's background, which is addressed at paragraphs 127 to 129 of the Verbasco report, in case you want to refer to it. So, did Charlie Rowley move into 9 Muggleton Road on the 18th of May 2018?
Yes, that's correct.
And why is that potentially relevant to the hypothesis regarding how long he had possession of the perfume bottle?
Well, he'd moved there relatively recently, but he had lived in Salisbury previously before moving into that address.
Sorry, he'd moved from Salisbury to Muggleton Road.
Yes, correct, sir.
When?
On the, forgive me, the 18th of May, I believe it was. Sorry.
18th of?
May.
Sir.
So we're going to hear about Charlie's accounts, but I think in one of his accounts he indicates that he didn't have the bottle before he moved. So if that were true, then that date would be significant when you're looking at the possibilities.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that right?
Yes.
Prior to the poisoning, Charlie Rowley was known to Wiltshire Police. Is that right?
Correct.
And did Operation Reed establish there were a number of Wiltshire Police records showing he had a number of convictions, including for possession of heroin?
Yes.
And the Wiltshire Police had information to suggest that he was involved in using and dealing Class A drugs?
Correct.
And also a record that he was a methadone user?
Yes.
For the avoidance of doubt, is that a prescription drug used to treat heroin dependence?
It is. I believe in Charlie's case he had to go to a chemist to get methadone to be given it at the chemist on the day.
And
Well, it's usually fairly controlled, isn't it? So
It is.
people don't accumulate it.
Absolutely, sir.
Yeah.
And can I ask the same question I asked in relation to Dawn Sturgess in respect of Charlie Rowley? Was there anything in his background, lifestyle or finances which was of any relevance to how he came to be harmed, or which indicated he might have been the target of an attack?
No, there wasn't.
However, DCI Murphy does indicate in his witness statement that Charlie Rowley's lifestyle, habits and involvement with drugs was of relevance to the investigation. And do you agree with that?
Yes, definitely.
We're going to move now to addressing the movements of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley, 139 to 147 of the Verbasco report.
139. Yep.
Friday the 29th of June, Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley were in Dawn's room, the Cedar Room at John Baker House in Salisbury, where they were joined by 3 friends, Sam Hobson, Callum McRae and Matthew Derrick.
That's correct, yes.
June 2018. Commander Murphy, this, I believe, was preparatory to explain what we can see.
Yes, it is.
So obviously that's to assist us, but you'll decide having regard to. Before I do so, just indicate to any family and friends of Dawn Sturgess in particular who may be watching that this... Could we please go to the CCTV, which is the audio-visual presentation, I should say, at INQ 006048 and 5879. If we can just pause the presentation for a moment.
Thank you.
And there are stills of the CCTV within the Verbasco graphics pack, the graphics pack being 5819, and it's pages 95 to 113, sir.
95 to 113.
Yes.
Thank you.
If we start, we're just going to play the timing. Before I do, so you'll be very familiar with the fact that quite often the timings are out on CCTV. I think you, sir, referred to it earlier. This is the case here, but that's where the commentary is helpful because it indicates the real time as well as the clock in the background on the CCTV.
So anybody watching this needs to be careful. The printed time on a CCTV excerpt may well not be accurate.
That's right, but as I say, the commentary does indicate
Yes.
what the actual time
Just as
was,
well,
and we'll look at some other sources as well as we go.
Right.
So starting at the timer is 0.32 and will run to 2.10.
On the morning of Friday the 29th of June 2018, Charlie Rowley left Dawn Sturgess's room in John Baker House, Salisbury, at 8:20. Between 8:20 and 30. At 12:32, Dawn Sturgess left her room for the first time that day, walking along the corridor and out of view.
12:30.
A short time later, she returned to her room. At 12:43, Matthew Derrick arrived with Sam Hobson, joining Dawn Sturgess, Charlie Rowley, and another resident, Callum McRae.
If we just pause there, thank you. We'll come back to the CCTV in a moment. Commander Murphy, do we see there Dawn Sturgess coming in and out of her room, the Cedar Room at John Baker House,
Yes, we do, yes.
and being joined there by a small group of people?
Yes.
And can we see a map in the background which flashes on the camera icons to indicate where the CCTV
Yes.
is that we're seeing?
Yes.
Looking at paragraph 139 of the Verbasco report, does that report note that Sam Hobson said in a witness statement that he, Charlie Rowley, and Matthew Derrick injected and smoked crack cocaine while at the premises?
Yes, in fact, and heroin and crack cocaine, I believe, yes.
And that Callum McRae smoked some crack cocaine?
That's correct.
So that's he, Rowley and Derrick.
Yes, sir.
So, as I did earlier, could I deduce the witness statement of Sam Hobson, which is footnoted to the Verbasco report? The reference is INQ 000812. Sorry, 814, sorry.
0814. Yep.
Yes. Commander Murphy, if we could skip forward to 3.19 of the presentation, and we're going to run to 5.08 on the timer for the presentation.
Callum McRae, Sam Hobson, and Matthew Derrick left Dawn Sturgess's room. A few minutes later, Charlie Rowley also left. Charlie Rowley and Matthew Derrick returned briefly before leaving again at 14:25, this time accompanied by Dawn Sturgess. The group left John Baker House, turning left onto Rolleston Street to...
Thank you, that's fine. If we just pause there, Commander Murphy, we see there the group leaving and turning left onto Rolleston Street.
Yes.
In the graphics pack in front of you, there's a map. We'll just go to that map on the screen at INQ 005819 and page 96. If we can make that a little bit bigger.
Well, it's not terribly far from where we are now, is it, Miss Whitelaw?
No, indeed, and it will be very familiar to others, no doubt. So, Commander Murphy, a map of Salisbury city centre. Can you just explain the route that Dawn Sturgess took out of John Baker House to Queen Elizabeth Gardens? We're going to go back to bits, but if you can just give us an overview of that.
Yes, of course. So you'll see the dotted line circling John Baker House. Having come out of the building, they turn left and they walk where you see on the map it's described as the Old, to that crossroads. At that crossroads, I believe they visit a shop briefly called the Best Local Newsagent, which is circled, thank you. And then they turn right, having come out of the newsagent, they go back onto Winchester Street, which is slightly covered by a sign here, and head towards...
Of where the red circle is?
Yes, absolutely.
Got it.
And for your reference in the Verbasco report, Commander Murphy, paragraph, can you tell us which shops they visited and what they bought?
Yes, it's actually not all parts of their journey are incredibly clear to us. Butcher shop and bought a blanket. Their intention was to go to Queen Elizabeth Gardens to spend some time in alcohol. And they also stopped at Boots where they bought some hair dye. Elizabeth Gardens around about 3:20.
So I'll ask you slightly later on, if I may, to admit the evidence of some of the witnesses to deal with the purchases. But for now, if we could go back to the CCTV audio-visual presentation.
Have we got Queen Elizabeth Gardens on this map, Mr. Murphy? We haven't, have we quite?
If we zoom out, sir, yes, you'll see it's on the left-hand side.
If you zoom out, yes.
Yes.
It may be so that that map doesn't zoom quite as far.
That one does.
We'll come to the point, and it should show it on the presentation as we're going to pick up where we left off. Well, in fact, slightly after the purchases, we'll pick up the CCTV at, so INQ 006048. We'll pick it up at 6:55. We're going to deal with the purchases that Commander Murphy's mentioned, just identifying those places where they stopped.
Thank you.
The first one should be the Boots at about 6:55 on the timer. There we go.
Sturgess and Sam Hobson entered Boots in Silver Street, where Dawn purchased hair dye.
Thank you. I think next, Commander Murphy, the group go through the old George Mall to the Catherine Street exit. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And if we go to 8.47 of the CCTV.
1500, Dawn Sturgess and Sam Hobson entered an off-licence on Catherine Street, where Dawn Sturgess and others from the group made purchases.
Thank you. And if we then go to 9.37,
Just before 15:15, Dawn Sturgess and Sam Hobson entered Poundland, where they made further purchases.
and then 10.41 on the timer, please.
The group walked past the toilet block in Crane Bridge Road towards Queen Elizabeth Gardens. Charlie Rowley joined them a few minutes later.
Commander Murphy, so at 15.21, they're at the Crane Bridge Road toilets by Queen Elizabeth Gardens with Charlie Rowley, who'd left the group for a bit before then, arrived at Queen Elizabeth Gardens, a public park, at 15.21.
That's correct.
But did Operation Reed obtain an account from Sam Hobson, who in his statement said that the group drank alcohol and that Charlie Rowley, Callum McRae and Matthew Derrick attempted to use red and blue hair dye to decorate themselves in the park?
That's correct.
Sorry, who did? Charlie and?
Callum McRae and Matthew Derrick, the other individuals
McRae
in the
and
group.
Thank you.
So I've already asked to adduce Sam Hobson's witness statement, and we're going to bring into evidence Charlie Rowley's accounts in a different way later this morning. Commander Murphy, did Sam Hobson and Charlie Rowley's accounts also indicate that Dawn Sturgess showed some disapproval of the hair dyeing and there was some disagreement about it, which led to the group leaving Queen Elizabeth Gardens after about 45 minutes?
Yes, that's correct.
And if we go back to the CCTV, so you asked the question about the location, and you'll see on that image the CCTV camera icon that's circled is where just by the Crane Bridge toilets, which is just by Queen Elizabeth Gardens.
Yeah.
If we go,
Looking out from the gardens across Crane Bridge Road, by the look of it. Yes?
In this case, yes, onto the road, actually, onto Crane Bridge Road.
Onto Crane Bridge Road, where the black car is.
Yes.
Yep.
and then if we could go to 11:03 on the timer, please.
The group left the park at 16:06.
And then 12.12 on the timer.
They walked along Winchester Street and turned left into Rolleston Street, returning to John Baker House at 16:23.
And then if we could go to 13:39 on the timer.
At 16:45, they split up in Blue Ball Row, with Sam Hobson and Matthew Derrick heading towards Guildhall Square and Charlie Rowley boarding a bus to Amesbury.
We pause there, thank you. So in terms of timings, we've seen leaving Queen Elizabeth Gardens at 16:06 and then the group returning to John Baker House. Matthew Derrick, Callum McRae and Charlie Rowley all leave John Baker House. And as indicated there and in the Robasco report, the men separate with Charlie Rowley heading to Amesbury. So you'll recall that I asked earlier for permission to adduce the witness statement of Caroline Sturgess of the 22nd of August 2019. Could we just go to that statement, which is INQ 004389, page 3, please? This is interposed because of the timings you will see, sir. That's INQ 004389, page 3. If we could just highlight the page 3, the paragraph that begins, "I received a call from Dawn."
At the bottom.
Yes. I'll read it out. "I received a call from Dawn on Friday the 29th of June 2018, and Dawn said she would like to see GS," that's her daughter. "I think this was around 5 or 6 p.m. Dawn said she didn't mind whether this was on the Saturday or the Sunday, but that she would ring me in the morning to arrange a time. This is the normal arrangement, as I can make sure Dawn's in a good place before she meets GS. During this call, Dawn was talking about moving into her new flat and asking for reassurance she would be okay when she moves out of John Baker House." So, Commander Murphy, does it seem as though Dawn Sturgess spoke to her mother at that point, once the others had left John Baker House?
Yes, the timings would correspond with that.
And for your reference, 142 of the Basker report, Charlie Rowley was in Amesbury only for a brief period, is that right, at that point?
Yes, that's correct, yes. When he called a bus back.
So, caught a bus, another bus out and bus back.
Exactly so, yes.
I think the bus was back at 17:50, arriving at 18:15.
Correct.
And he met up briefly with Sam Hobson before the pair separated again. And Sam Hobson returned to John Baker House at 18:51. Could we go to 16:20 on the audiovisual presentation, please?
Hob joined 100. Charlie Rowley returned to John Baker House, where he joined Dawn Sturgess and Sam Hobson.
About 8 o'clock, is that it?
Yes.
Yes. So Charlie returns to John Baker House. Sam Hobson is also there, but he leaves. Referring back to the Verbasco report, Commander Murphy, does Sam Hobson leave at about 8:30 to catch the 8:38 bus back to Amesbury?
He does, yes.
And then back to the CCTV of the timer at 18:10.
Quarter to 10.
Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley left John Baker House at 21:48. They spent a few minutes speaking to a woman in an orange dress at the junction of Rolleston Street and Salt Lane, before walking back past John Baker House towards Winchester Street. Dawn Sturgess went into the convenience store and purchased some alcohol before they walked towards Blue Ball Row and the bus stop outside Debenhams. They waited for a bus to Amesbury. The bus departed at 22:06.
Thank you. We can take down now the audiovisual presentation. Commander Murphy, and I'm referring now to DCI Murphy's witness statement at paragraph 35C. Did Operation Reed subsequently identify as evidence in the investigation a bus ticket for that journey that we've just seen?
Yes, that's correct. It was inside the perfume box that was subsequently recovered from Muggleton Road.
If we could go to INQ 005126, page 12, please. Is that a picture of the bus ticket within the perfume boxes you've just described?
Yes.
Thank you. And if we could go to page 10 of the same.
So screwed up in the box.
So,
The
yes.
box itself, I think we were told yesterday, was found on the floor by the bin.
So, yes.
Yep.
And page 10, please, of the same document, the INQ 005126.
Like that.
And is that where the box and ticket were found?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, Miss Whitelaw.
So it's difficult for us to tell, but it may be that someone has put the ticket in the box when it's been opened and then sort of thrown that towards the rubbish. Or it potentially could have landed, but it looks as if it's in the box. Did Operation Reed have any views about that?
Nothing especially about that, because as you described, there's lots of reasons why the ticket could have found its way into the box. Interestingly, at some point we do believe the box was in the bag. There's some water damage to it that may have come from the bin had quite a lot of, please forgive my description for this, but bin juice within the bottom of it, so a lot of liquid in the bin. And so it's possible the box was affected by that.
When you say the bag, which bag are you referring to?
The bin, sorry. The bin, yes.
The big bag. So the white one we see there.
Yes.
The reason I ask is obviously we saw on the CCTV Dawn Sturgess and the blue bag with the purchases, and then later on we'll come to.
Yes, sorry, I'm referring to the bin bag, yes.
Thank you. If we can now go to INQ 005262, page 6. And I think that's the ticket, isn't it, for 2 adults issued at Salisbury Blue Boar Road at 21:58 on the 29th of June to Boscombe Burley Road.
Yes, that's correct. I think it would have stopped at a bus stop just near Muggleton Road, which would have allowed them to get off the bus.
Yes, looking at, so first of all, that's consistent with the CCTV,
Yes.
isn't it? And I think at INQ 005819, page 113, is the still of the bus at Blue Boar Road. And coming back to what you've just said, Commander Murphy, and looking at DCI Murphy's witness statement, paragraph 35C, in relation to the destination, did Operation Reed say that the destination, Boscombe Burley Road, is 1.4 miles past 9 Muggleton Road, but the X4 bus stops approximately 150 to 200 metres from the address, and it's likely that Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgess are lighted there.
Yes,
But there isn't any CCTV coverage of that part of the journey, is that right?
correct.
And Commander Murphy, what did Operation Reed conclude, both from the CCTV and Charlie Rowley's subsequent accounts, about where Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley stayed that night?
So, for all accounts, it appeared they stayed at Muggleton Road together.
And is it right that the inquiries about Dawn Sturgess's movements on the Friday, the 29th of June, were necessary to try and identify any significant events, including Dawn or Charlie coming into possession of the bottle?
Yes, it was all about how did they become poisoned or come in possession of the bottle itself.
But in fact didn't really reveal significance in terms of how Dawn came to be poisoned.
Agreed.
So there are a number of witness statements dealing with the movements we've seen on the audio-visual presentation in the CCTV on the Friday, the 29th of June. I don't intend to read those out or bring them up, but again would ask you to admit them as part of the evidence in the inquiry, and with your permission they'll be published by the inquiry on the inquiry website. They are, first of all, the witness statements of Sam Hobson. There's a statement dated 2nd of July 2018, which is INQ 000813. And this addresses his relationship with Charlie Rowley and events on the Friday the 29th and Saturday the 30th of June 2018. There's a witness statement of Sam Hobson dated the 7th of July 2018, which is INQ 000814. And that witness statement gives more detail about the events of the Friday and Saturday. Then secondly, there's a witness statement of Matthew Derrick, one of the group, INQ 000778. He was one of the friends seen on the CCTV on the Friday, the 29th of June, and he speaks of events, including that he himself took heroin at John Baker House, but he says Dawn doesn't take heroin, and he addresses purchases in Salisbury, that is Dawn or Sam buying the hair dye in Boots. And so in particular, Matthew Derrick confirms that he was at Queen Elizabeth Gardens with Charlie Rowley, Dawn Sturgess and others on the 29th of June, as did Sam Hobson. Then thirdly, there is a statement of Callum McRae, who was the other individual seen on the CCTV, and his statement is dated the 11th of July 2018, and it's in INQ 004529. And he also confirmed that he went to Queen Elizabeth Gardens with Charlie Rowley and others. Fourthly, sir, there's a witness, Sinan Dzalvanov, a shop worker at Charlie's convenience store from which Dawn Sturgess purchased tins of alcohol, and that's INQ 000786. Fifthly, sir, there's a statement...
That's the second off-licence visited, is it? It's the one en route to the bus.
Yes, I believe it's the last one where we just saw the picture.
That was described as a convenience store, the other one wasn't.
Yeah, I believe so, sir.
Right.
And fifthly, sir, we've heard there was no CCTV in the gardens. There is a statement from a member of the public, Emma Smith, who gave a statement dated the 11th of July 2018, INQ 000926, in which she said she was in Queen Elizabeth Gardens at 15:40 on the Friday when she took some photographs, which is how she knows the time, when she saw a group, and she describes a female eating an ice cream and two males messing around with what looked like red paint, which may be consistent with the group's description of the hair dyeing. And sixthly and relatedly, INQ 000922, a witness statement from a Stephen Romaine dated 27th of July 2018, and this was an ice cream seller in Queen Elizabeth Gardens on the Friday, who said he was pretty sure he sold Dawn Sturgess an ice cream between 3 and 4 p.m. on Friday the 29th of June 2018. A seventh statement of Shane Mead, INQ 000881, a witness statement dated the 10th of July 2018. He indicated that he had a drink with Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgess in Dawn's room at John Baker House in the late afternoon, said they were drinking frosty Jack cider and had a chat for half an hour or an hour. And then finally, INQ 000808, a witness statement of Ozkan Hayatsu, the shop owner of the Best Local. It's dated 11th of July 2018, and that's where he says that Dawn Sturgess appears to. He says that Dawn Sturgess purchased Polish beer just before boarding the bus.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's the one on the way to the bus, right?
I think that was the one because of the timings.
Yeah. And the number of that one, Whitelaw, was?
INQ 000808.
808. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That now takes us at a point in time to the Saturday, the day that Dawn Sturgess became unwell.
Yes.
I'm going to hand over to Mr. O'Connor, sir, to address that aspect and Charlie Rowley's accounts, but conscious it's nearly 11:10. I don't know whether you would like a morning break at this stage.
Well, if it's a convenient time for you, we're going to have to break at some time. Now's as good as any. 20 past, please. Mr. O'Connor.
So the stage of the narrative that Ms Whitelaw reached with Commander Murphy before the break was the end of the day on Friday the 29th of June 2018. And as I mentioned in my opening, when we move forward to Saturday the 30th of June, there is a stark contrast in the sense that, as you've seen this morning, there's a large amount of evidence about what Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgess and others did on the Friday, but there were really only two witnesses to what took place in the flat on Muggleton Road on the Saturday morning. Dawn Sturgess, who of course sadly never regained consciousness, and Charlie Rowley himself. At one stage we had planned for Mr Rowley to give evidence this week, and of course had he done so he would have been able to cover those matters in sequence. But for various reasons he isn't now giving evidence this week and is timetabled to appear to give evidence in London, in fact towards the end of the hearings in November. There are two important factual issues that his evidence covers. The first one, which we have mentioned more than once, is the question of how he came into possession of the perfume bottle. How, when, where. And the second, as I've just mentioned, is that of the events of Saturday the 30th of June. Because Mr Rowley is now not coming for some time, what we intend to do is to address the second of those issues, that is the events of Saturday the 30th of June, now by means of taking you through Mr Rowley's evidence about what took place that morning. Principally, I will take you to certain passages of his witness statements and also certain passages of the transcripts of the police interviews that he gave within a few weeks of the events. And that is all I will do. We will leave that other issue, the question of how Mr Rowley came into possession of the bottle, when, where, and so on, until that section of the evidence at the end of the hearings where we hope Mr Rowley will be present to give evidence about that himself.
Right.
So that's the plan, and I will cover the events of Saturday in three stages. The first, evidence about Charlie and Dawn together in the flat on the Saturday morning, and in particular, of course, the perfume bottle. The second, evidence about Dawn becoming ill and an ambulance being called. And the third, Charlie's movements after Dawn was taken to hospital, including him developing symptoms himself and an ambulance attending for him. So before I turn and take those stages of the evidence in sequence, there are two just preliminary matters I wanted to address you on. And the first is a general point about the reliability of the accounts that Charlie has given over time. And may I start by taking you to, in fact, a statement that he has provided to the inquiry very recently, and that is INQ 005982. You see it's on the screen. You'll see, sir, the date in the top right-hand corner is August of this year. And we will come back to this statement later, but for these purposes, I'd like to take you to paragraph 5 at the bottom of the first page, and then over onto the next page. Under the title, My Memory, Mr Rowley states that at the time he gave his accounts to the police, his memory of quite a lot of what happened before I was poisoned, I'm reading now, was very bad. The same is true now. I have very little memory of what happened before I was poisoned. This was and is partly because of the Novichok itself. I noticed that it affected the thought processes in my head. Since the poisoning, it's been a lot harder to think and to concentrate. I tend to overthink things. I feel anxious often. I've had a lot of peculiar dreams. And then he adds, my memory was also bad because of my daily use of large amounts of alcohol, methadone and or other drugs. I currently do not take any drugs. And then he adds that his first interview was on the 13th of July 2018, after he had been unconscious for a number of days. And he says that when he first came round, he had very little recollection. He couldn't even remember who Dawn was. Mr. Rowley's difficulties with his memory, in particular, caused, he thought, by the effect of drink and drugs, was something that he very frankly discussed with police officers in July 2018 in the course of his interviews. And I'd like to take you just to two references, please, to the interview he gave on the 15th of July. And you'll have seen there, he refers to the first interview on the 13th. He gave interviews day after day. So the first was on the 13th, second on the 14th, and the third on the 15th. But if we can go, please. I see we've already...
Sorry, 13th, 14th and 15th.
Yes, and more after that, but just to give you a sense of it. This was then his third interview. It's on the screen. You can see the date at the top there, the 15th. And if we can go, please, to, first of all, to page 11. And a little over halfway down the page, we see Mr. Rowley saying, as I said, I was drunk.
Sorry, what day is he talking about?
I'm sorry?
Which day is he talking about?
He's talking about the Friday. You can see just above, he's talking about getting on the bus.
Yes.
I think I've got the wrong... Yes, I'm sorry. So, right page. It's page 11. I was looking at the wrong page. And it's at the top, about 4 entries down, where the police officer says, OK, can you tell me the route then from the park? So again, we're a little earlier on the Friday, where you got back from the park to your address. And Mr. Rowley says, no, because we would have been drunk. I don't know, honestly can't remember. But we definitely got home that day. Police officer says, OK, when you say we definitely got home that day, and then again, how do you know that you definitely got home on that day, that night? And Mr. Rowley says, because we woke up in Amesbury the next day. And then there are some further questions about the bus and the journey back to Amesbury. And if we can go over to the next page, please. There are a series of answers that Mr. Rowley gives where he says he only remembers things vaguely. And then a little over half the way down, you see the police officer says, is it usual for you, Charlie, because obviously you're being very honest about the amount that you drink, that you don't remember any details of the actual each day? Is that the usual thing? And Mr. Rowley says, pretty much. So a sense of the difficulties that Mr. Rowley was having in terms of his alcohol intake in answering the police officer's questions. And then if we can go to one other reference within this interview transcript, please. We can go on to page 26. And this is a section where Mr. Rowley talks about the effect of his drug habit on his memory. And starting about half the way down, we see a lengthy question from the police officer. Can I ask, Charlie, sorry, do you take anything else other than... This is a wider investigation. We're not looking at, in terms of any other illegal substances you might have taken. But this is all about just getting an understanding, really, of why your memory is obviously not as good as we would like. Did you take anything else other than alcohol? This is not a way to trip you up. And Mr. Rowley says, yes, I may well have taken some heroin. And just reading down, he's asked how much he may have taken. He says he doesn't know. He's asked, is that something you would do on a what kind of basis? How often would you take heroin? Mr. Rowley says, regularly. He's pressed on what he means by that and says daily. And he gives then some further evidence about how much he used to take. If we can scroll down onto the next page, please. And then having said that how much he would take, we see the police officer saying a day, okay. So again, that's really to get an understanding really of why it's really difficult for you to actually recall your movement. And he says, not really. And the police officer says, what's not really? Sorry, it's not a way to trip you up, Charlie. It's really just trying to understand. Again, putting that to one side, you're saying about the heroin, are there any locations you can recall going to, even if it's to buy drugs? But we're looking at the bigger picture here now, trying to find out where you went, Charlie. Is there anywhere you recall going to on the Friday that may assist with tracking your movements, so we can kind of search those areas more? And Mr. Rowley says, no, I can't really remember, to be honest. He's asked whether he recalls buying drugs on the Friday. He says, I think I might have just been drunk. So I hope that assists. That there are lengthy interview transcripts, and these subjects come up from time to time. But those two excerpts give a sense of the difficulty that Mr. Rowley had in answering some questions and his frankness in explaining at least some of the reasons why that was. So that was the first of the introductory matters. The other is that since when I get to the transcript references about Mr. Rowley's and Dawn Sturgess's movements on the morning of the Saturday, we will be hearing about their movements around the flat on Muggleton Road. I thought it would help if I just took you very briefly to some documents which show the outline of the flat, the rooms, the layout, and so on.
Yes, please.
So if we could have, please, INQ 005133. And thank you. Well, in fact, at the top left there we see Charlie and Dawn on the bus on the Friday evening. But of more interest, for present purposes, the bottom right, a photo of the front door of the Muggleton Road address, and on the bottom left, a plan showing the layout of the flat. And if we can go to the next page.
So it's an upstairs flat, is it?
Indeed.
Yeah.
So what we see is, if we look at the plan, at the bottom, you see some stairs. Those stairs, obviously behind the front door, going up to the first floor flat, into the area marked 2, which is a hall. Off the hall, the room marked 3, the bathroom. We'll hear something about the bathroom. And then turning round to the right, as it were, the large room on the right-hand side with the number 5, that's where you will hear most about. And you can see that, and we'll see in a moment some photographs, but towards the top, as we look at the plan, is the sort of lounge sitting area, and bottom, the kitchen. And I think lastly we can go to page 5 of this plan. Yes. And what we can see there, you see the two photographs of the flats. That the upper photograph is a picture taken from the kitchen looking towards the sitting area with the sofa that we will hear something about. And the photograph underneath it, taken the other way, showing the kitchen. And one of the unusual details of this kitchen, you may notice, is that there are 2 microwave ovens in it. I mention that because we will hear Mr. Rowley from time to time talks about standing next to the first microwave, which one assumes is the one nearer to the camera here. So that's the other introductory matter, and I'll start now, if I may, with the narrative of events. And I will go first to Mr. Rowley's statement. It's dated July 2019. It's INQ 005676. We may hear more about how this statement was drafted, but the inference is that it was very largely based on the interviews that Mr. Rowley gave, in fact, a year earlier, in July 2018. And we will be looking at those transcripts shortly. But starting, as I've said, with the evidence about Charlie and Dawn in the flat on the Saturday morning. If we can go to the third page of the statement, please. And starting 3 paragraphs down, we see that Mr. Rowley says this. On Saturday the 30th of June, I woke up reasonably early in the morning with Dawn at my flat in Amesbury. It was between about 9:30 and 10 o'clock. I was hanging around in the kitchen area and I spotted the package that I picked up a couple of days prior and thought, now's a better time than ever to give her a present. I showed it to Dawn. I think I took it off the kitchen table to show her. I was hungover. I just remember thinking, oh, I remember finding that. I think Dawn was a bit moody with me. She's quite subdued, and she was talking about doing her hair colour, and I showed her the perfume. I think I said, look what I found. Before I gave it to her, I told her that I'd found the perfume the other day. I would have asked her what she made of it, and if she knew if it was any good. I gave it to her whilst I was stood up in the kitchen area, just in front of the sink, or just by the side of the cupboard in front of the first microwave. Dawn looked at it and opened it, possibly tried to assemble it, couldn't get into the packet, passed it back to me. I opened the box by unfolding the top lid of the cardboard box. I pulled out the drawer, which was a moulded plastic case. The case held 2 items. I would guess the plastic was white, but I don't recall the actual colour. The moulding held just 2 items, a pump dispenser and the glass bottle. The pump had no case on it. The glass bottle had a plastic case over it. I tried to open the wrapper around the bottle, but it was a tough plastic. I had to get a knife to cut the plastic wrapper open. The plastic was light polythene type plastic. I thought because of the packaging it was a genuine product, and also Dawn knew the name. I cannot remember what it was called. I cut the plastic with a 12-inch wooden-handled knife on the kitchen table. The perfume bottle was a couple of inches big. I dragged the blade over the plastic to open it. Once the plastic was open, Dawn tried to assemble it and failed. So I tried and managed to pour it over my hands. I can't remember if there was anything on the top of the opening of the bottle. Dawn was trying to push the plug on top to fasten it. I used quite a bit of force, but it spilt. I think it spilt near the microwave or near the sofa. Once the top was fastened, Dawn sprayed it once on herself. She sprayed it on her wrist. I sniffed it, but it didn't smell like perfume. I sniffed my hands, but didn't get any on my nose, but it touched my skin. It was just an oily substance. I can't remember what it smelt like. It wasn't a horrible odour, but not like something I had smelt before. I thought, that's not right. I was quite covered in it, so I had to wash my hands. I put the bottle straight back on the windowsill, and I washed my hands straight away with the soap from the white container that's in my kitchen. I just lathered the soap and rinsed it off. I probably dried my hands on my jeans. So I'm going to pause there, and we will come back, as I said, to look at another part of the statement which deals with Dawn Sturgess's reaction.
Could you just go back to the plan of the flat, please?
Yes, so that is INQ 5133, and maybe that page 5 is the best page.
The one, preferably the one which has got the photos with it, but whichever.
That is page 5, sir.
Right.
So the plan on the left-hand side, and we see the long room, as it were, on the right-hand side of the plan.
Yes.
But then the photographs showing the sort of lounge living area on the top, with the black leather sofa.
Yep.
So it isn't clear, to me at least, whether that sofa is in the position that it was in at the time or whether it's been moved. There's It's away from the wall. But no doubt we can investigate that. But then you'll see the middle picture, the kitchen, the two microwaves, the first microwave nearest the camera, and beyond that, along the counter, the sink.
Yes, and his recollection, such as it was at the time of the statement that you've just read, was that he spilt the contents on himself either by the microwave or by the sofa, which are, in fact,
Different places.
a little way apart.
Yes. And so that is one of the respects in which Mr. Rowley's evidence is not entirely consistent across the interviews.
There it is.
Yes.
And secondly, in at least that statement, what he said was that having done so, he put the bottle down on the windowsill. There's a windowsill somewhere near the sofa. Is there one anywhere near the microwave?
Well, so there will be evidence about where the bottle was found.
No, I know that's where it was found. What I'm asking about is where there is a windowsill such as he might have been remembering.
Well, so looking at the photograph, there's certainly a window near the sofa, so
Yep.
one assumes there's a windowsill
But
there.
not, I think, in the kitchen. At least not.
It's
Oh, well,
hard.
maybe, yes, maybe there is.
I think there's one just above the tap, sir.
Okay, so there's a windowsill there too. Right.
And so, if I may,
Yep.
the evidence will hear about where the perfume bottle was found was just below that windowsill above the tap.
Thank you.
So I'm going then just to go to a few sections of the interview transcripts where Mr. Rowley gave his account, which then became the section of the statement that I've just read. I'll start, if I may, with the first interview, the 13th of July interview. That is INQ 005683, and it's page 29. I'd pick it up from, please. And so starting, if we may, towards the top, you see an answer about 4 lines down where Mr. Rowley says, no, it was sealed. And the police officer says, yeah, sealed box. He's asked whether it was on its own in any kind of bag or anything. And Mr. Rowley says, no, it was just in a black box. And then he goes on to say, with a plastic seal, you had to cut the wrapper to get into it because it was sealed. And the police officer says, okay, so like on cigarette packets, you mean, that kind of seal? And Mr. Rowley says, no, it was like, no, a tight thing, you had to cut it. He's asked if he'd seen that material anywhere else. He says it was just a thick plastic. He says, a little lower down, I just thought it was a kind of beauty product thing. He's asked, so the plastic it was wrapped in, have you seen any other boxes that might have been packed like that? So we can understand. Over the page, Mr. Rowley says the box was just a box, and inside the box, the container was in a sealed plastic wrapper. Police officer says, right, okay, so the box on the outside was just a box, and then the container inside was the one that was sealed. Mr. Rowley says yes. There are then further questions and answers. He's asked again if he'd ever seen that kind of thing before. He said no. But he adds, but Dawn recognised the product. He says she recognised the name. And he's asked, do you recall when you had that discussion? He says, yes, when I showed it to her. And he showed it to her, she read what it was. And he says, I recognised it, I opened it up, spilt it on my hands, thought nothing of it, put it in the jar, in the container there, in the glass there. He's asked, how did you open it up? He says, with a kitchen knife. Can you remember which kitchen knife? He said, one in the kitchen. Can you describe it? It's a wooden-handled one, a long-bladed knife. He says, well, Mr. Rowley then says, I've only got 2 long knives. And he was using the one with the wooden handle. And then a little further down, just so that we can, the police officer says, just so we can see it's just about over half full looking at that image. If that's correct, can you remember how full or not it was when you opened it? Mr. Rowley says, like I said, I spilt it on my hand. And he's asked if we can go over how much of the bottle do you think you spilt on your hand? He says, well, quite a bit, I suppose. I just washed it off. He's asked, how did that happen? How did you end up spilling it? He said, I'm just trying to contain it, just trying to screw it together. He's asked, how did that work? What were you trying to screw together? He said, it was a funny container. He said, it was a white push-down thing. He's asked, was the white dispenser already on the bottle when you opened it? He said, no, it just spilt out when I try. He's asked, where was that within the packet, within the box? He said, that was in another sealed unit thing. And he's clearly talking about the dispenser there. Mm-hmm. And so the police officer says, so within the box there were 2 sealed units? He says, yes. Okay, and from what you're saying, you tried to put the dispenser into the perfume bottle. Yeah, that's when you spilt it. Yeah, I don't think that's got anything of significance at all. Just by context, this was the first interview, and at that point Mr. Rowley had not understood that the perfume bottle contained what it was that had poisoned both him and Miss Sturgess.
No.
So that's all I was proposing to read of that interview. If we could go to the next interview, please, which was on the next day, and it's INQ 005684. And page, within that, page 29. So if you can go to page 29, about a third of the way down, you see the police officer saying, do I understand? So just talk to me about that morning. Describe that morning to me, what both your movements are, what exactly you've done. Mr. Rowley says we were hungover. He says that Dawn might have been a bit moody, like she usually is. She's quite subdued, talking about her hair colour. And he says he showed her the perfume. He's asked, where were you when you showed her the perfume? He said we were both sat down. He's asked whether that was the sofa. He says yes. He says, Mr. Rowley says, I tried to open the wrapper. It was tough plastic. What wrapper was this? He said, the glass bottle it was in, so I had to get a knife to cut the plastic wrapper open. Okay, to get into it. He's asked, but before you opened that plastic wrapper, when you both sat on the sofa, where did you get the box from to show Dawn? He says, I don't know. I was hungover myself. He says, do you remember the box being in your hand? No. And moving over the page, the officer says, okay, I'm just trying to find out exactly what your movements are with the box. Mr. Rowley says, yes. So what I've got so far is that you're both sat on the sofa. You've shown Dawn the box, yes. Then opened the box. Who opened the box? Mr. Rowley says, I think I opened it. Can you describe opening the box? He said, opening it, it was a cardboard box. Opening the lid. Mr. Rowley says, taking that, I think it was a plastic container thing that contained it. If we can go over, he's asked again, what was inside the box? He says, I think it would have been a plastic case that would hold like the 2 items. Can you describe the plastic case? He says it's a moulded plastic. He's asked, do you remember what colour it was? He says, I guess white. He's asked, do you recall the actual colour? He says, no. He says, was there any colour to it? He says, I'm guessing. So he says, do you remember it was plastic? Yes, moulding. And Ken asked if he could describe it. He said it just held two items, a pump dispenser, and then on to the next page, and the bottle. He said, asked then, what did you do with the plastic moulding that held the bottle and the dispenser? He said, the pump had no case on it. It had no plastic sheet on it. And the glass bottle had a plastic case over it, plastic which I had to cut with a knife. So he's asked, so that was just on, so you know the plastic moulding around both of them, was that separate or was that together? Were they both in the same plastic moulding? He says, I believe it was the same, in the same thing. And he's asked again, so the bottle and the dispenser, both of them are together in a plastic moulding? He says, yes.
Well, he just said a little earlier, hasn't he, that the pump had no case on it?
I think by this stage, he'd said both things.
He did say both things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both that it had and that it hadn't.
Yeah. Well, at least at the second point, what he's doing is agreeing with something that was suggested.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he then goes on, well, just took it out, pulled it out as a thing, and there's the bottle, there's the pump. He's asked how easy it was to pull out. He says, I don't know, it wasn't hard. He said he didn't need any instrument to help him, that is, pull it out. He said, just with your hands, yes. And then he goes on, Mr. Rowley, the plastic that the bottle was sealed in was tight plastic substance kind of thing. That's why you had to use a knife to cut it. He's asked, was it hard plastic? He says, no, it was more like I don't know what you call it, polythene type plastic. Says that he agrees that there was polythene around the bottle and says that's what you used that's what you used the knife for. He said, yes, to cut it open. Next page, to get into the bottle. And then he's asked, okay, you said the dispenser didn't have that polythene. And he says, no, not that I can believe, not that I can believe. Not that you can recall, yeah. And then the police officer comes back and says, just so I'm sure, the two items, the bottle and the dispenser, they weren't individually wrapped. They were in one container, one plastic moulded container. Mr. Rowley says, yeah, I believe that's true. Goes on to say that's what made him feel it was a genuine product. Dawn recognised the name. He said he remembers her knowing what it was. And then over the page, slightly different subject, he says, when I got it on my hands, I smelt it. Didn't smell of perfume. It was oily. I thought, what's that? That's not right. I was quite covered in it, so I washed it off. I had to wash my hands, but Dawn sprayed a bit on her wrist. The officer says, we'll take this slowly. Explains he's got to work out each step. So the officer then goes back to the plastic moulding. He said, you said it was easy to open or easy to pull out, sorry. Mr. Rowley agrees. Was that what you described? He's asked, plastic moulding around the two items. Mr. Rowley says, He's asked, how did you manage to pull it out of there? Mr. Rowley says, well, it's just a cardboard box with a folded lid. Unfold the top lid, pull out the drawer, which would be like the moulded plastic, which contains the two items. And he's asked, did you have to open the moulded plastic? Mr. Rowley says, no. It was just the plastic with the two items in it. So that's all I'm going to suggest we read of that part of the transcript. But if we can go on to page 41, the same transcript. About halfway down, (41). That's it. So about halfway down that page, Mr. Rowley is asked, yeah, and then what happened after that? And Mr. Rowley says, I think Dawn tried to assemble it and failed. I done it and managed to pour it all over my hands. Police officer, yeah, I know. You said how. So you know when you took the plastic film, polythene, off the glass bottle, yes. Was there anything on top of the opening of the bottle at that point? Mr. Rowley says, I can't remember. Police officer says, okay, when you took the polythene off, yeah, had it spilt at that point at all? Mr. Rowley says, no. And police officer says, no. And you say that Dawn was trying to put the dispenser, yeah, the plastic bit on top of that bottle? Mr. Rowley says, yeah. Do you remember how she was trying to do that? Do you remember? Mr. Rowley says, just push it in. Just plug it in. Just fasten it. And he's asked, do you know what was stopping it? He said, no, I don't know. Then he's asked, how did you try to do it? Mr. Rowley says, just with force. How much force do you think you were putting on it? Quite a bit, because it spilt. He's asked, do you remember what made it spill? He says he has no idea. He's asked, then, going over to the next page, I know you said yesterday it was your hands. Can you describe exactly where it was on you when it spilt? He says, I don't know, it was just in the kitchen, I think. He's asked, do you remember whereabout you were in the kitchen? He says, near the microwave, possibly. Right, and you said it was on your hands. Yeah. Did it spill anywhere else? He says, maybe near the sofa. I don't know. Might have been near Dawn, but it went on me. He says, and then when it fastened, Dawn sprayed it on herself. He's asked, do you remember where Dawn sprayed it on herself? He says, on her wrist. Do you recall which wrist it was? He said, no. Just like that, I suppose. And he's asked then, so she rubbed it on both wrists? And Mr. Rowley says, yeah, I think so. Okay. Mr. Rowley says, yes, but at the time, I sniffed it. I thought, oh, it doesn't even smell like perfume. So when you sniffed it, yeah, how close was it to your nose? How close did you get your hands to your nose? And Mr. Rowley says, close enough to know that it didn't smell of perfume. He's asked, do you know if you touched your nose at all? And he says, no, I didn't touch my nose. But he says further down, touch my skin, though. And he agrees it was on his hands. He says it had just smelt. It had an oily substance. And agrees that it was oily feel on his hand. And he's pressed again, if we go over the page to page 45. Were there any kinds of smells that you can describe? And he said, I can't remember. I don't really know what kind of smell. I suppose it did have a kind of an odour. He's asked if it was a horrible odour. He says no. Anything you smelt before? He says no, but Dawn believed she knew she'd heard of the product before. He's asked, right, so what did you think of it when she put it on her wrists? He says, don't know. Sorry, what did she think of it when she put it on her wrists? And Mr. Rowley says, I don't know. He's asked, did she say anything? He says it was after that that I recall her saying she didn't feel well. How long after that was it? I didn't really piece it together until, and the police officer says, no, I understand. Mr. Rowley says, because as we were both hungover, and he said, I believe that she got ill another way. If we can go over the page, please. We see Mr. Rowley saying he was convinced it was just some sort of beauty product. He's asked, would you be able to tell, time-wise, how long after she started to feel unwell? And he says 10, 15 minutes, I suppose. And he says he phoned the police, no, the ambulance. And at the bottom of that page, he says, yeah, because she got into hospital, into the bath, and that's when she started acting peculiar, breathing funny. That's when I thought I'd have to phone an ambulance, because I was panicking. And then he's taken back in time. Right, but when you spilt it on your hands, he says, I washed my hands. How long after you spilling it on your hands did you wash your hands? He says, straight away. He says, just with soap. It's probably the white container. He said, he says it was on the kitchen side. Okay, so you put soap on your hands. Yes, and asked how long did he wash it off for? He said, just rinse. Police officer says, okay, and what was your hand action? I don't know how you normally wash your hands. And Mr. Rowley says, yeah, just lather. And further down, rinse. He's asked, he says that, or he's asked rather, after he rinsed his hands, what did he do with his hands after that? Looking further down the page, he says, I don't know, probably just dried them on his jeans. And he's asked what happened after that, and if we can go just the first entry of the next page, he says, like you say, Dawn became ill shortly after that. And so just 2 or 3 more excerpts, but much shorter ones now. If we can go to page 52 of this transcript, please. At the bottom, towards the bottom of the page, Mr. Rowley is asked by the police officer, did you actually see Dawn with the bottle when she sprayed it? And Mr. Rowley says, yes. Do you know how long she had it in her hand for? Top of the next page, not long. Not long. Okay, when you say not long, put that in time for me, whether in seconds, minutes. He says, well, like I say, probably about 15 minutes before she became feeling a bit unwell. That's all I ask you to look at there. And if we can go on to another transcript, please. This is, in fact, a transcript from the 1st of August of 2018, INQ 003112. And it's page 62 of that transcript. He's asked some more questions about the wrapper that had wrapped at least one of the items inside the box. About a quarter of the way down, he's asked, so these were recovered from your flat, and we think they may well have been used to shrink wrap the perfume bottle. And Mr. Rowley says, right, I don't remember it as being as dirty as that. I thought it was quite clean. And we can see, we may be able to see what he means in a moment, because I'm going to show you the photograph that they were looking at. And we see the police officer saying, I think it's because it's been subject to some testing. It's possibly been tarnished. And then if we go over to the next page, he says it has a different appearance to what we see now. But then the police officer says, but we think that was used to shrink wrap the bottle inside there. And then Mr. Rowley says, okay, so that was the actual perfume then, that was the perfume bottle. And the police officer says, well, that's what you're saying. So this is for you to tell us, really. Let me just go back a little bit, what I've been told. Mr. Rowley says, what's the name of the perfume on the bottle? And the police officer says, well, let's listen. If we just go forward to the next page, please. Top of the next page, got the bottle. It was wrapped in heavy, how did you describe it? Mr. Rowley says, as in a plastic moulding which contained, like the bottle and the pump. He said, yeah, but the actual plastic. Mr. Rowley says, in a plastic, there's a moulded plastic tray type thing. Okay, all right, a tray. Yeah, a plastic moulded tray that contained the bottle, and it looked genuine to me. And then the police officer says, but as I understand it, you struggled to get into it. Mr. Rowley agrees and then says, because it's very thick plastic. He said that it would have contained a bottle, thick plastic, polythene. And he said, he's asked, you described it as thick polythene. He said, And then if we go to the next page, we see he's asked, but having a look at it, that's a photograph of exhibit. And then it's been redacted and given a cipher, but the cipher is VN555/5. And we'll look at that in a moment. So in fact, it's one of the photographs that you saw during my opening. He's asked, do you recognise that? Mr. Rowley says, yeah, I do. That would be what contained the bottle, I believe. And he's asked, okay, as sure as you can be, out of 100%, what would you say? Mr. Rowley says, 100%. He's then asked, so that looks exactly like the wrapper? Yes. Mr. Rowley says, because I got the bottle and I had to saw at the end of it. At the end to get the bottle out of the casing, because the plastic was so thick I couldn't tear it. So he says he had to saw it with a sharp kitchen knife. And that's all I ask we look at of that transcript. But if we could go, please, to INQ 004675. So that's would appear to have been the photograph he was being shown. You see the exhibit reference. Again, it's redacted in the same way, but it's VN5555. And it's perhaps useful to have seen the explanation that was given for the sort of discoloured liquid that is covering the bag. We will obviously hear more about that, but that may simply be because the result of the bag having been tested. And so there's one more transcript reference I'd like to show you. It's on a transcript of an interview that took place a week later, on the 8th of August 2018. It's INQ 005687, please. It's just a page or so. And at the bottom of that page, so page 18, we see he's asked, did you remember actually putting the white tap on top? Mr. Rowley says, yeah. Over to the next page, he said it was a struggle, but it went on. And then he's asked, all right, when you said it was a struggle, was it a struggle because you don't consider yourself very nimble with putting small things on, or was it physically made that it was hard to get on? Mr. Rowley says it was just tight, a tight fit that I can remember. I think when it did go down, it took like a couple of pumps for it to actually click in. And hence, I got it all over my hands. He says, but if I'd have known it was poison, I wouldn't have sprayed it in my general hand direction. He's asked, what are you doing? Are you sat down or stood up at the point where he said, I would have been stood up in the kitchen area, just in front of the sink, or just by the side, by the cupboard in front of the first microwave. So those are all the references I was proposing to take you to, and I hope they give a little bit more depth to the statement that I read, first of all. So I said that there were three stages. I moved to the second of those stages, which was Dawn becoming ill and an ambulance being called. We saw there in the transcripts Mr. Rowley talking about a period of about 15 minutes. And if, for these purposes, we can go back to that statement of his, please. So it's INQ 005676. And it's here we'll pick it up at page 4. It's the second full paragraph. Miss Rowley says, I do not know what Dawn thought, but it was after this she said she felt very unwell. But I thought this was because we were hungover. Dawn began feeling unwell about 10 to 15 minutes after she sprayed the perfume on her wrist. She was sat in the sofa and having the discussion about finishing doing her hair. She wanted to put some hair colour in her hair. She just put blonde in her hair and she wanted to put some blue colouring or something. She said that I might need to help her, but then she said that she felt very, very strange and that she had to go and lie in the bath, which I thought was a bit strange. After a minute, I went into the bathroom to see what she was doing, and I found her lying in the bath with her clothes on, just lying in the bath, convulsing and foaming at the mouth, and I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Thoughts were running through my head, and I didn't know what to do. I was thinking, what do I do? What do I do? The only thing I could think was to call 999. I did that and had a complete memory blank. I didn't even know where I lived, so I was running around trying to find some bits of paperwork. I was trying to find out where I lived, something with an address on. I managed to find something, and then I thought, the place isn't on Google. And I was trying to give directions, but not for ages. They advised me how to give her CPR and mouth to mouth until the ambulance arrived. It felt like the whole time she was getting worse and worse and worse, to the point she stopped breathing and was trying to breathe, and then I had to pull her out of the bath. I would like to clarify that I'd taken Dawn out of the bath before I called 999. The bath had not contained any water. Dawn was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Eventually the ambulance turned up, and yeah, my head was just screwed. I didn't know what to do. I was just pacing backwards and forwards. I couldn't watch. I didn't know what to do, whether to pack a bag, but I felt helpless. And shortly after this, Sam turned up, and Dawn left in the ambulance. I was unsure what to do. Sam called and turned up within minutes. He said he was worried about me. He'd been trying to phone me, but I had kept cancelling him because of what was happening. Thank you. So, just to give you some timings to put alongside the evidence you've just heard, we will hear in due course that the 999 call that Charlie Rowley made was received at 10:14 that morning, and the ambulance left the scene at 11:50.
11:50.
11:50. And so, finally, just to deal with that third stage of the day, we will obviously hear a lot of evidence about the treatment of Dawn, and both initially by paramedics and then in hospital. But as I mentioned, there is also a narrative relating to Charlie Rowley for the rest of that afternoon. And if I can do that, please, by taking you to a page of the police report. So that's INQ 005820, page 49. So this is a summary of the evidence relating to Charlie's movements later that afternoon. It's drawn very largely from the evidence of Mr. Hobson, that we've already adduced in evidence, and also another friend of Charlie's called Mr. Milsom, who we'll hear more about. But just reading this, it says, Charlie Rowley's friend Sam Hobson and acquaintance Ben Milsom arrived at the address just as Dawn Sturgess was being carried out. Milsom then drove Charlie Rowley and Sam Hobson to a Boots chemist, where they collected their methadone prescriptions. Milsom dropped the pair back at Charlie Rowley's address before leaving. Sam Hobson recalls that once at the property, he and Charlie Rowley each used heroin. Shortly afterwards, Charlie Rowley and Sam Hobson left the property and briefly attended Sam Hobson's home address. Charlie Rowley waited outside while Sam Hobson went in. The pair then attended an outdoor fete organised by the Baptist Church on Raleigh Crescent Green, still in Amesbury. Sam Hobson recalls that they had refreshments from the stalls and spent a few minutes in a prayer tent. At approximately 15:30, Sam Hobson and Charlie Rowley returned to 9 Muggleton Road. Around this time, Charlie Rowley began feeling very unwell. He appeared sweaty. He used the shower, spent 20 minutes in his bedroom, and then went to rest on the sofa in the living room. Sam Hobson recalls that Charlie Rowley was behaving very strangely. Around 18:30, Sam Hobson called the South West Ambulance Service to report Charlie Rowley's condition. He used Dawn Sturgess's phone to place the call. And then just finally to add one further piece of evidence about that period, if I can take you back to the recent statement that Mr. Rowley has provided us with. It's, I think, the first document we looked at, INQ 005982. And if we can go, please, to the second page. So you'll see that the last two paragraphs there are headed 30th of June 2018. And Mr. Rowley says this: on the morning of 30th of June 2018, when I found Dawn in the bath and realised she was ill, she had drool coming out of her mouth. I tried to help her while I waited for ages for the ambulance, but her condition got worse and worse. I was shocked and stunned by this. I couldn't go in the ambulance with her, as I had to go and pick up my prescription. I had intended to go later to Salisbury and see her. I packed a bag together for her. I've been thinking about why my symptoms took much longer to come on than Dawn's did. As I've said previously, I washed the Novichok off my hands very quickly using soap and water. Dawn did not do so. I went back into 9 Muggleton Road later on the 30th of June 2018 and could have recontaminated myself then. I smoked a half-used cigarette, and it could be that Dawn was holding that when she sprayed the Novichok on her. I used the tap that I had used earlier just after I got Novichok on my hands. I may have touched one of the places where the Novichok had been left when I spilled it, or when Dawn sprayed it, or otherwise. So there are clearly further matters that we will consider with other witnesses. So that completes the core evidence of Charlie Rowley about, as I've said, his movements and his evidence about others on the 30th of June. There is that important other issue about when, where and how he came into possession of the bottle, but as I said, we will leave that for now and come back to that, we hope, with him later in the hearings.
Yes. All right.
So I think it's now the plan that Ms. Whitelaw will recommence her questioning of Commander Murphy.
Very well.
So, well, in fact, I wonder if I've got just some statements to adduce in relation to the events of Saturday, which will take a few moments. And it might be better after that to have a lunch break if you were content to do so for two reasons. One is the topic, the nature of it's going to be the forensics of 9 Muggleton Road, and secondly because a couple of document issues have arisen during the morning in terms of versions of documents. So I'd be very grateful for the opportunity to liaise with Operation Fabasco and just to make sure that we have the latest version and that we're all referring to the same one.
I'm sure we can all cope. Well, indeed, we must all cope with having lunch at a slightly different time from usual, it'll be the same length of time, by all means. So we don't need Commander Murphy back until after that, is that right?
Thank you, sir. I will just deal with you, if I may, with some of the witness statements.
Yes, please.
That will adduce. Mr. O'Connor has been touching upon Charlie's movements after Dawn was taken to hospital,
yep.
And there are a number of statements which deal with the events on that Saturday, and of course, although it's after the poisoning, there were some conversations had with Charlie about Dawn and her going to hospital, and he obviously was contaminated at that point. So the statements I would ask, first of all, in relation to Ben Milson, who you've heard mentioned, He has two statements. One
He's the
is
chap who drove them to the chemist's, is that it?
that's right, and he was a friend of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley. Drove in a red van, which we'll hear about, on the Saturday. He'd been phoning, he says in his statement, he'd been phoning Charlie Rowley that morning and Sam Hobson at about 10:48, 10:52. And then his last phone calls were about 11:08. He says he calls Charlie Rowley 7 times. And then they go to the house.
By then, Dawn is clearly very ill and the ambulance has been called.
Exactly, so
Yes.
the timings one can see. So those statements are INQ 000884 is Ben Milson's statement of the 7th of July 2018. And his statement of the 8th of June 2018 is INQ 004525.
Yeah.
He borrowed the van from his brother, who also gave a statement, witness of Tom Milson, INQ 004520, and that statement is dated the 9th of July 2018.
Yeah.
And then in terms of Charlie Rowley's movements, there are some statements to do with an event at Amesbury Baptist Church, which he attended. There's a statement of Roy Collins, which is INQ 000764, the 6th of July 2018. And Elizabeth Davis, INQ 000769, dated the 10th of July 2018.
So that's the church fete.
Indeed, and that Roy Collins was the secretary of the Amesbury Baptist Church, and Elizabeth Davis was the wife of the local pastor, and their evidence is that they interacted with Charlie and Sam Hobson on Saturday, the 30th of June, in the afternoon.
Sometime up to about 3:30, according to what the police report, which Mr. O'Connor read.
Yes, so Mr. Collins'
ago.
statement says about 2:30 he interacted with Charlie Rowley and Sam Hobson, and then Elizabeth Davis's statement says between 3 and 3:30. So.
Right.
Thank you. Well, those are the statements I wanted to adduce. If we may take a slightly earlier lunch break, so I'd be very grateful.
Yes, well, in all these cases, Miss Whitelaw, unless there's any good reason not to, the various statements that you've referred to can be treated as part of the evidence which I've got, and they'll be available to everybody, will they, on the website?
Yes, indeed.
Right. 1:30 then, please. 1:30.